Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 5.3, Civil Rights Protests Part 1. It includes information that goes along with the first section on your unit study guide. Now remember, you have control over this. Use your study guide to help you figure out what's important to write down questions you have, and rewatch it anytime you need. Let's go ahead and get started. Brown versus Board of Education and the Montgomery bus boycott were definitely not the end of the civil rights movement. Really more the beginning. They were the beginning of years of action and fighting to gain equal treatment in America by minority groups. In this set of notes, we'll look at other actions that occurred along this road to equality. So first, to really understand the extent to which African Americans were mistreated, especially in the South, but also in the North, I want to tell you briefly about the story of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a 15-year-old from Chicago who went to Mississippi to visit family in 1954. While he was there, he unknowingly offended local whites. So to punish him for this, he was kidnapped from his uncle's home in the middle of the night, beaten, tied to a water wheel, and thrown into the river. His body was unrecognizable when it was found. The adult men who did this to him were found not guilty. We'll talk more about the case in the class, but this really shows how horribly African Americans were being treated, and other minorities as well, during this time. And it was accepted. In addition to unfair treatment, the South also had these laws called Jim Crow laws. These were directed specifically at blacks to keep them segregated and not allow them the same opportunities as others. Many dealt with voting, like grandfather clauses, literacy tests, and poll taxes. And many of these Jim Crow laws were what African Americans were fighting against with the court cases like Brown versus Board of Education and the Montgomery bus boycott. Those acts did not make things fair everywhere. In fact, following the Brown versus Board of Education decision, many schools still did not segregate. There were even elected officials who tried to actively stop desegregation from occurring, and the national government had to step in. For example, in 1957, 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, 9 black students planned to be the first to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. These students were actually met by the governor, mobs, and the National Guard at the door to the school to keep them out. In fact, the 9 were not permitted into the school until President Eisenhower ordered the 101st Airborne Division of the United States to escort them into classes. This made national news and gained the name the Little Rock Nine for this group and this action. It was often students and young people who acted to end discrimination and to gain more fair treatment during this period. In fact, in 1960, a group formed called the SNCC, or SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They had previously been a part of the SCLC, but they really wanted to focus more on student-led actions. SNCC and other student groups organized many nonviolent protests throughout the civil rights movement. Soon after their creation, one of the things they began to organize was sit-ins in order to desegregate restaurants and other public areas. So the first was at a lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it happened in 1960. Basically, the protesters and sit-ins simply sat together at the all-white counter waiting to be served. So the blacks and whites would sit there. They were attacked, they were harassed. Eventually, the police would come and arrest them, but they never responded with violence. Peaceful protest was the name of the game. And while that might seem strange, the nonviolent actions actually gained national attention. So instead of turning people away from their cause, Americans saw these peaceful protesters being beaten, spit on, arrested, and attacked. The protesters gained sympathy and support with their nonviolence, rather than turning other people off with the violence. So this led to more and more acts of nonviolent protest, everything from the Freedom Rides in 1961 that tried to desegregate transportation, to the integration of Ole Miss by James Meredith in 1962, and then the University of Alabama was desegregated in 1963. Martin Luther King Jr., he wrote his letter from Birmingham jail, he led the March on Washington, and he gave his I Have a Dream speech all in 1963. And then there were also voting rights drives and marches throughout the decade. So these actions and others all paved the way for legislation and support for change. We'll talk more about all of them in class. So this is the end of U.S. Notes 5.3. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, bring those to class.